Hi there, I'm Jake, and this is Field Guide. We're going to be talking about the John Lofgren U.S. Navy low quarter in both black and brown. At first blush, that doesn't necessarily sound like the most exciting thing, but I can't promise. I will try to make you understand why I think this is very interesting. The U.S. Navy low quarter shoe comes in two different colorways. They come in black and they come in brown. In a modern fashion perspective, that is great because pretty much between black shoes and brown shoes, you basically cover every single possible iteration of a fashion situation you might need. There's actually a historical reason for why that is, and that's actually why I think it's sort of interesting. For most of its existence, the Navy has just worn black shoes. They don't wear brown shoes. Our Navy, like basically all navies, are very tradition focused. So things happen and they become the traditions and they sort of stick around. That was always the case in the U.S. Navy until the early 20th century when the Wright brothers actually offered the U.S. Navy, hey, would you like an airplane? And the Navy said, sure, but they also had no pilots. So the Army volunteered to train the Navy officers, because they decided they had to be officers, to fly these flying machines. And this was in like 1913, I think. So a long time ago. A lot of people, they think about the U.S. Navy and they think about airplanes, and one of the top guns probably pops into their head, and so they think about the need for speed and all of these things, and
best of the
cool,
best.
the best of the best, cool jackets and rad sunglasses. And what you need to be thinking about in 1911 are horse-drawn carriages and no aircraft carriers anywhere. They wouldn't even exist for another decade. Lots of coal-burning ships. No nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, nothing. And so they show up at this Army field, like all fields at the time. It's covered in dirt and dust. And they show up wearing their black shoes. And their black shoes immediately get dirty with dust, which you would normally think of as not a problem because, you know, you're working. And the first thing they notice is all the Army aviators are wearing brown shoes. And you can't see the dust. So that's the first inkling the Navy has that maybe another shoe would be a good idea. Second thing that happens is they go back to their ships, they go back to their bases, and they get yelled at by their superior officers because their shoes are dirty. And I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, better to beg forgiveness than ask permission. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these aviators decided, well, we wouldn't stand out compared to our Army officers who are also going through training if we just had brown shoes made. After they had done that, and they hid the dirt and did all the things that the brown shoes also did for the Army personnel, in 1913, the Navy said, okay, fine, if you're an aviator, you can wear brown shoes. That was just a sort of response to a condition in the world that made sense to be like, these will look cleaner, my military appearance will be maintained, and I'll still be following uniform regulations.
So it was literally just because of the dirt runways?
Yeah, that, and people always like to sort of feel like they belong into a group, and so the Army aviators that they were learning to fly from and going in through training with all had brown shoes. So these naval aviators, even though they were part of the Navy, they felt we'll be more of like a cohesive unit if we're all sort of dressed the same.
Right.
Hence the brown footwear. So you still have in today's Navy a brown shoe Navy and a black shoe Navy. And people in the Navy will actually call someone a brown shoe officer or a black shoe officer, depending on whether they are aircrew. So they would be like a pilot or a flight officer or a flight surgeon. Say you get to wear brown shoes. As Navy doctrine evolved and developed, people stopped wearing stuff like this in airplanes. Like nobody flies in these. I mean, like, well, I don't want to say nobody. Like you or I might go and wear them on an airline or if we have a private pilot's license. But nobody is climbing into a jet and piloting it and wearing those, like wearing a G suit and an oxygen mask and all the things that people wear now. You just wear boots the same as everybody else. But when you're in your uniform, you can wear brown shoes if you're of an aviator designation, and as opposed to the black shoes.
Is that kind of like dress whites for certain ceremonial things? Would they wear these over?
You could. They don't always, but you could. And you can wear these on duty too, as like your duty uniform.
Right.
And so
it's
like
not as strict.
It's not as strict. Like it's led to things being classified in ways that are sort of interesting. Like any of the people who are in command of an aircraft carrier have to be aviators of some sort. So they're all brown shoe officers. That hadn't always been the case because, like I was saying, aircraft carriers sort of pop up in the 20s and nobody really knows how to use them. like it's tempting to think because we drive an aircraft carrier basically around the world just to be like, we have an airport here, and
They're
like
pretty ubiquitous now.
do things. Everybody sort of has an understanding of what it is an aircraft carrier does. But in 1922, they didn't really know. They sort of thought, well, these would be great. They could help us figure out where the enemy fleet is, or they can help us spot like where our ships are firing. And that's really useful because like even at the start of World War I, airplanes didn't have guns. Like it's like there wasn't a fighter plane. It didn't exist.
And they were like made of paper too.
Yeah, they burned real easily. They were made of paper. And so like it took a while to figure out how you could use an airplane militarily. So that was like constantly being developed. And so the people that wind up being in command of aircraft carriers like during World War II, which is like when there were the most of them, were theoretically aviators. But a lot of them were like only aviators in like the broadest of categories, because some of them were like in their 30s or 40s when they like sent them to a flight school, and they like probably flew a plane, and like if they landed it on an aircraft carrier once, they never did it again, but they got their wings, which would enable them to be brown shoe, and then they could command an aircraft carrier. But all the doctrine that kind of came out of that war that we think of as like, well, this is obviously what you do with an aircraft carrier, like it just didn't exist. So you have all these brown shoe people sort of mostly figuring that out, and they did sometimes have black shoe officers in command of a aircraft carrier just because they needed someone, and they were well regarded usually, but it's like there's just a difference. They thought people in command of aircraft carriers should understand pilots. But so much of the things that are still traditions in the Navy exist because of that history, and that's why you have these shoes. It's not like, it wasn't for like Navy uniforms sometimes look better with black and sometimes look better with brown. It was like you do a thing, you get this uniform. There was like a 10-year period where that wasn't the case in like the 70s. But Elmo Zumwalt was the chief of naval operations and hadn't been an aviator, and was sort of like, all right, enough's enough. You guys all wear black shoes. And the aviators kind of revolted, and so it got reinstated in the 80s. The shoes are really simply constructed for a shoe. If you look, they are just a single piece of leather, and it's only sewn here, but it has the 360-degree Goodyear welt. Yeah, 360-degree Goodyear welting around the entirety of the shoe. What that means in practical terms is you can get these resoled. You can replace the bottom when it finally eventually wears out, though I imagine it'll take some time. These are really designed in a way that sort of highlights the construction, because there's no broguing anywhere. There's not even a toe cap. The quality of the leather will take sort of the center stage. The quality of the materials, the quality of the sole, those are the things that are sort of the focal point of these shoes. Because of the simplicity of the styling, you can kind of wear them with anything. They're a good like summer shoe. You can sort of dress them up if you want. You don't have to.
They're kind of like if you described a shoe to someone who'd never seen a shoe.
Yes.
That's what they would come up with. It's
yeah,
just
although
like default shoe.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is what the aliens would make.
Yeah.
Except maybe the last would be different.
It's almost like the fact that there isn't that much styling or embellishment adds to their stylishness.
100%.
You know what I mean?
I'm using the brown shoe because the contrasting detail makes it a little easier to see. If you look at the black shoe variant, like it's still got all the same features, but the welting, the stitching is tonal. The sole is tonal. In some ways is like if you want like a modern look, at the black ones kind of do the trick because it's so monochromatic. But they have the same details and the same construction. I'm sure there's at least one or two Navy officers that are buying these and like styling on board, and like nobody knows.
They're also our customer.
Yeah, exactly. But by and large, if you're in the Navy, you're not buying these. These are like the best quality version of what this is. What is the whole Greek thing where it's like the shadow on the wall and you're trying to understand the nature of reality?
The allegory of the cave.
The allegory of the cave. This is the thing on the wall that everybody else is trying and sort of failing to duplicate just via description or their limited glances at it. This is like particularly elevated way of making them.
Would you say these are the best of the best?
Yeah, I would talk about those for a moment. One of the other interesting things in terms of the Army has nice things. Why can't the Navy have nice things too? I want to talk a little bit about the N1 here. This is sort of the Navy version of in what the Army was the M43 service shoe, which is like...
We did a video on.
Which we did a video on. This has a slightly different toe shape because it's built on a different last. You know, people always joke around about the greatest generation. They were still a bureaucracy just like anybody else, and the military still theoretically on the same side, but also fighting with each other for dollars. One good way to make sure you're getting some of your funds is to invent a shoe that is basically functionally equivalent to something that already exists, but has a different shape.
Can you explain what a last is, and maybe particularly what this one used?
I don't know particularly what this one used.
Isn't that the Munson?
This is not the Munson.
Oh, it's not the Munson. Okay.
That's the difference. The M43 uses the Munson last, or the last that Lofgren uses is based on the Munson last, which the Army created by doing extensive research and testing. A last is essentially the shape that the shoe is built around. So it's like an ersatz foot, basically. It doesn't have all of the, you know, appendages that a foot does, but it approximates the shape of a human foot, and they're built in different shapes. So you can make, say someone has wide feet. The Munson is a wider last, so that means the shoe will be wider that's constructed upon it. The last that the Navy used for the N1 is a narrower last than the service. You can see here, these actually are not necessarily the same last. These look wider than these. And I've seen some earlier footwear that the Marines issued to officers that were very much like these. You have similar rough side out leather. You have a different sole. If you're a Marine, say, these might be shoes that you would be issued if you're like off to fight in the Pacific, and you'll be standing alongside a U.S. Army soldier who might be wearing M43, and those boots from afar would look identical, but they're not identical. They're built on different lasts. They have slightly different materials. One thing that sort of arose out of this is now it's much more common where the military will just be like, everybody gets this. It doesn't matter what branch you're in. But that didn't really exist at the time. So you wind up seeing stuff like this that has different details to accomplish the same task. You see a lot of pictures of people dressed in essentially non-standard attire, which makes sense. Like the Army's a much bigger organization. It's kind of all over the place, and command authority is often very far away, especially if you're like an infantry person. Like you're at the front lines, and you're the people who might knock you for having out of regulation facial hair or boots that aren't quite right are not going to see you for a very long period of time. Whereas in the Navy, you're on a ship. Like it doesn't matter that you might be like a gunner or an armorer or someone who works in the aviation gasoline. Like you're gonna see the captain, you're gonna see the executive officer because the ship is only so big. So the Navy has a much easier time enforcing like grooming standards and uniform standards. It even went as far during World War II as like everybody thinks of planes as like having nose art, during the war, and that's especially true for the Army Air Force. Either pinups or other different things painted on the nose. There was like literally one carrier-borne Navy squadron that had nose art, but the ship they were assigned to, apparently with a captain that was okay with it, was, I think, sunk. It was the USS Princeton. And so all those aviators had to land somewhere else, and as soon as they landed on other ships, those captains were like, paint this. Like that was it. So there's like a much bigger sort of overwatch in terms of like standards in general in the Navy. So you'll see a lot of people wearing non-standard things in the Army Air Force, and to a lesser extent in the Marines. No, I don't think I want to add anything, so I'll just close by saying these are and have been and will be the John Lofgren U.S. Navy low quarter shoes. They are available in-store and online. You should pick up a pair and decide if you want to be Team Brown or Team Black. I have my favorites, which I've probably made patently obvious, but everybody's different. And I have been and will be Jake, and thanks for listening to me ramble about shoes and stuff. Please go ahead and leave a comment on which shoe is your favorite, brown or black. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye-bye now.